Welcome to Moving Iron with Casey Seymour and Greg Peterson, the podcast for anyone and everyone involved and interested in the business of ag equipment. If you want to understand what trends and market forces are impacting the price of your iron, you've come to the right place. Buckle up, it's time to move some iron.
Hello and welcome to Moving Iron Podcast. I've got Greg Machinery Pete Peterson here with me, and special thanks to John Deere for sponsoring this edition of Moving Iron Podcast. Greg, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Case, how you doing?
Doing pretty good, man. Doing pretty good. We were talking a little bit before the show, and there was a collector piece that sold for almost $1 million. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, our friend Kurt Ahmed with Ahmed Auction, Ahmed Vintage Power out of Nokomis, Illinois. They had their pre-1930 auction on Tuesday night, Casey, and the one everyone was kind of talking about, I think it was a 1911 model. It was an Imperial 4070. It's beautiful condition. Kurt and the team there provide tons of background. They know all the history on that stuff. And it's over $955,500, almost $1 million. So 1911, what are we talking, 114 years old?
Yep.
But, that gets back into that period. People forget about it, but there were so many different companies that were making tractors back then as tractors were becoming a thing. So Deere didn't buy Waterloo to what, 1918? So
yep.
Pre-1918, all these companies were having a whack at it, and you just don't see many of them. I think Kurt said there was only 3 known to exist, these 4070s, 3 known complete ones and 1 project one. So yeah, pretty cool to see 955.5. And I guess I look at that, and it's a very extreme example, but it just shows, there's no shortage of money, whether it's the right piece of land or obviously crazy item like that.
Yep. Yeah, there's plenty of money, and more people are starting to show up to start moving through those things. You're looking at one of the markets that I've had just kind of getting my head wrapped around things. One of the tougher ones that I had a hard time with, just based where the cattle market's at, is the loader tractor market, that 125 horsepower to 175 horsepower tractor. For the longest time, it was not like it was stagnant. It wasn't like it was going backwards or anything like that, but it just wasn't getting a lot of momentum, which you thought you would see with the way things are moving. And here of late, you started seeing some movement there, and it feels like that market is starting to heat up a little bit. You seen anything on the auction side that points to that?
Yeah, actually, I think on the auction side, what we've been seeing, Casey, strength for going on 2 years now. Honestly, it's just been very solid. Just recent example, we had one, our friends at Merit Auction, Zach Heiner and the team, their great crew. They had a farm estate auction out at Plano, Iowa. I think it was last Wednesday for Donnie Hedgecock. They had a John Deere 6115M. I lose track exactly the horse on that, but had a loader, 962 hours, sold for 107.5. And I mean, that's the highest auction price ever on a 615M. Previous high was 101 2 years ago, back when the market was, at the top. That sale also had a couple really nice balers, kind of going along with that sector. So they had a John Deere 338, one for 18,750, third highest auction price ever, and a Sharp John Deere 568 round baler, one for $39,000 on a 568. So I thought that was really strong. That was the 4th highest ever. So that was a good one last Wednesday out of Plano, Iowa.
Right on. As you're looking at the overall, kind of when you're going to these auctions and you start kind of talking to the public, what's your sentiment you're coming back with? You see some optimism there? You still see some cautious optimism? I mean, what are you seeing with the people that you're talking with?
I would say hopeful worriedness, if that could be two opposite things at the same time.
Right.
Yesterday I covered on the construction side. I was over in Merrill, Wisconsin. Was day one of a 4-day huge auction, 4,500 lots, integrity sales and auction, and tons of wheel loaders and excavators. And I was talking to the owner, Ross Landis, and I was filming there. Prices look solid to me, but talking to a lot of the construction folks, they're talking about general economy jobs and things like that. And there was a little bounce on the heavy iron side after the election early in 25, kind of holding right now. I know they did have a couple Komatsu W8 wheel loaders, a 320 That 290 hours went for 150 yesterday. And then excavator, 2018 Cat 320, 3,657 hours went for 150. But I do need to do a shout out for Integrity Sales and Auction, Ross Landis over there. Casey, it's the best use of video of any auction company I've ever seen. And they have a huge lot. And, a lot of my auction friends, it's great. They'll have a video, a little YouTube clip of an item, and they'll start it up, run it back and forth. And that, I've always thought that was step one, video for an auction. But Integrity Sales and Auction out of Merrill, Wisconsin, they show it working. And they've got Ross showed me the setup. They have all these piles of dirt, stone, and so they're showing the excavators at work. They're showing the dozers moving stuff as it's selling. It's a live event, but then multiple huge screens, and they just do a fantastic job. So I think I've been sort of preaching on the, how high quality auction of a piece of equipment working adds to the value. And I saw it in practice yesterday in Wisconsin.
Right. Yeah, it makes a big difference. I think that's you've ever been to Ritchie Brothers sell? You sit inside their climate control area, so it doesn't really matter what's going on outside. But they drive that piece across the ring there, and it does add something to it. When you see it moving and puff of smoke come out of the muffler and all this stuff.
What I like with the video is it's twofold. I saw it in practice yesterday, day of the sale, as the people were there or online, but before the sale, being able to see that dozer, and it wasn't like a 15-second clip. It was like they'd have a 4-minute video on every piece doing its thing. And so before the sale, that's just a ton of work for the auction company. But talking to Ross, I mean, he was pretty upfront, just said, we realize that's, we want to build trust here with our customers, buyers and sellers. And I just thought it was great to see that in practice.
Yeah. Yeah. They have the video does an amazing thing for it. You get to actually see it do what it's doing, and it adds that little bit of credence, I guess, to what's going on there.
I'm hoping with our site, machinerypete.com, as time goes by, we can, and I know on the dealer side, it's, the amount of pieces you have on the lots. Of course, now dealers aren't two stores. They're, 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever, in a lot of cases. It's hard to get that level of video, but really, I mean, if you have customers that you work with for decades, as a dealer, I would go out and get video of them planting and harvesting with your young staff people, so that when they do trade that combine or planter in, because our data screams it. When you have that real video of that item working, it sells for more money every time.
Yep. Yeah. I've always thought that, especially with drone technology, when you can get out there with a combine in the field, picking corn or cutting beans or whatever it's doing, and you can, do a 360 around it and show it doing this thing, and don't get too close and get sucked up into the combine. But you can really get some good angles and stuff, and really see it working. And I think that adds a lot of stuff to it, especially in the actual work environment.
Right. Yeah. It's the other thing too, just it's a very competitive world we live in, and in terms of geofencing your customers as a dealer.
Yeah.
Go shoot that video, and again, it might be 2, 3, whatever their trade cycle is, but provide the farmer with hey, John, here's cool drone video of your Kinsey planter in action or whatever. But then 2 years, 3 years when they trade it in, you've got that video that now it's just not one of 50. Whatever, Kinsey 3505s. It's you've got video on a sunny spring day in Michigan planting, cuts right to the top, sells for more money.
Yeah, that and you couple that with the work order history that you can put out there. I've always found that that's another thing too that seems to be guarded, but there's nothing to hide, right? It's one of those things where the more information you put out there, the better opportunity you have to spark somebody's interest when you're looking at selling that piece.
And a way to set yourself apart, whether that's an auction company or a dealership or selling it privately. Like you say, nothing to hide. In fact, one thing I don't know if you have exposure to it or have talked to these folks, Casey, but some of these, the data management companies that have popped up these last few years to deal with multiple crossover, whether it's John Deere, Case, or whatever. So your combine and your planters talk to each other, different colors. But the data, we're just at the very start of it. But when those started coming out, what I was most intrigued by is, oh, okay. So you're actually going to be able to have a complete detailed history of on a daily basis of what this machine did, my machine.
Right.
And when you're trying to sell it, it's always been anecdotal. Like, well, I just used this, I'll cover auctions all these years and I'll say, well, how'd you use this tractor? Well, this was our haying tractor, this was our whatever. And anecdotal is great. And it's great to see the farmer or seller say it on video or at the auction day, but I think it won't be too long. We'll have actually, hey, here's the data stream. Look at it yourself. On
Yeah.
May 5th of 2025, this dude was out doing his thing for 6 hours, and
Yeah.
like I say, we're just at the infancy of what could be there.
Yeah. And that brings it up with a good point on the data side is, what's, the percentage of usage during the time, of the power being used, you're using 300 horsepower tractor, you're using 85% of it or 55% of it, that makes
Right.
it tells a different story as
Exactly.
well. So
Tells you how it was used, right?
Yep. I think too, if you look at like, I went for the day, I've always, there's only the only machine out there that have 2 hour meters are harvesting units, right? So combines, forage harvesters, you have engine hours and cutter hours or separator hours, whatever that might be. And I've always wondered on sprayers when they're going to start having, spray hour meter and it's there, right? You can go look at how many hours it was at spray and then total hours, those kind of things, but it's never made the transition yet over to, hey, this has got, 2,500 hours over 3,500 hours.
That's a great point, Casey. I remember there was one auction we filmed for our TV show this winter, and the guy had a sprayer, and I sorry, I don't remember exactly what model it was, but when you looked at the hours on it, it wasn't like crazy low, and the thing sold really, really well. Now we did see a jump in sprayers with some age on them the past couple of months, but the story on it, when you talk to the auctioneer and the owner, was this guy's configuration of his land was such that he was on the road a ton.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just upfront with that, and so the amount of time in use, or like you say, how much horsepower application, it's always been anecdotal, and I think sometimes, particularly in the upper Midwest here, it's funny because people don't like to brag about their equipment when it comes to selling it. It's kind of funny, but I'm not saying people should brag about yourself, but just represent how you did use it. Because that does fill in some blanks for potential buyers. Oh, okay. Well, he only used that to do this. Okay. Maybe I'll go a little higher on that thing. So I think down the road, when we actually have data that you can show it and share it, it's like, hey, here's how I used it. Knock yourself out. That's just even more transparent.
Yeah, I used to tell those stories like that when I was working down in Kansas. There was an Amish community in the area, and because of how their religious practice goes, they can drive a tractor, but they can't drive a car. And so, they would use the tractor with a horse trailer and go to Home Depot or whatever and get lumber they need and this, that, and another thing. Well, you'd see some of these 4, 5, 6-year-old tractors come in that would have 6 or 7 or 8,000 hours on them, and probably 75% of those hours were up and down the highway. So
Right.
that tells that story a little bit better as to what you're doing. But again, it's still got 7,000 hours on it, so you have to account for that. It's a different 7,000 hours.
Got to share a story, Casey. I don't know if we've talked about it, but we filmed an auction. It was December 14th for our TV show, Crofton, Kentucky, so tobacco country, and a strong Amish community down there. And we got there the day before, did our pre-filming, interviewed the owner. It's a great guy. Dale C. was his name. Get there the day of the sale, and his farm was up this little hill. And I was like, what the heck? There was like 50, 60 tractors parked. And I'd noticed the night before when I was in town staying at the hotel, there were tractors zooming all over. There's a very strong Amish community there. and like you say, they don't drive cars, but they'll modify these tractors. And there was a particular footprint of tractor they were looking for, age-wise. And so, but it was all colors. There were Massey, there was Deutz, there was Alice, Deere, Case. I've never seen an auction before in my 35 years where there's so many tractors driven to the auction and parked. It was just, and it was a great sale. It was a fabulous day.
Yep.
Super nice people.
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty. I used to chuckle a little bit, because you go into town and there'd be, the Home Depot parking lot or Walmart or whatever else, there'd be 25 or 30 tractors sitting out there. Well, it's stuff going to go. So it's telling that story about the piece of equipment makes a big difference in what you're doing. Because like you said, you see 7,000 hours, until someone tells you different,
Right. Tell me how you used it. Whenever we film auction previews, it seems kind of silly. I ask the same questions all the time, but I just want to hear the farmer in his voice say how he used it. Because I know that guy 5 states away is going to go, oh, well, that's hey, I wanted to know that. Thanks for telling me. So,
Yep. One other trend line here we're seeing, I'm tracking and following a little bit, is just the timing of which equipment's being sold. And this, whenever you see markets like this where there's a bit of a contraction, there's a lot of last minute buying. As you watch the auction that you go to, you talk to the dealer friends that I've worked with and stuff like that. They're talking about, they're still selling planters right now. So if you take that into consideration, start looking at the combine sales, they're starting to kind of warm up a little bit because we're going into that time frame. But as you're watching these auctions, do you feel like you're seeing some last minute buying more than you've seen in the past?
I do. That was great insight, Casey. And also last minute selling, I would say. So I was at the sale yesterday. Now that was construction sale, but was talking to some farmers there. Of course, big crossover on big farmers need dozers and stuff. But we got talking about, in terms of quote unquote retirement sales. Of course, there's a lot more wordsmithing in this auction space than used to be when I started. So now, you can say it's a retirement sale, but folks know that, local folks anyway, know that it's not a retirement sale. There's some financial pressure. So when you add it all together, the month of April here in the U.S., has been the busiest April that I have seen.
Yeah.
Usually March is nuts. And then after the first week of April, it starts to kind of peter down a little bit. But man, pedal to the metal this year. So I think a little bit of both. People looking to buy in this tight market last minute, just like you said. And also, there's still strong balance sheets out there, but there's just no doubt there's pressure. So whether that's the lender, like, you got to sell some pieces, but had it all up, and April was busy.
Yeah. The number of conversations I've had with dealer friends of mine around producers not getting renewed for lines of credit or drastically being the amount they get being cut is a staggering amount of folks. I mean, it's shocking to listen to people talk about that.
Yeah. In this market, again, honestly, it is the most, I think, unusual moment that I've seen, because on the one hand, like, we saw a big drop last year. I mean, and everyone knew what the deal was. It was just, everyone was tightening the belt, and on the grain side, and the inventory situation, dealers were being so aggressive, the ocean of stuff flowing to auction. So of course the prices are going to soften. Now in past downturns, once that knife starts falling, it usually falls quite a while.
Right.
I mean, but Q1 of 25, auction prices actually went up a little bit.
Yep.
Now I've never seen that happen when sales of new have not taken off with it. Never in my 35 and a half years. Usually, for whatever reason, if the market, we're turning, used and new go the same. This has been different. So this is new is still, and used is bouncing a little bit. Now, I don't know if the bounce will hold. Last year, we hit June 1st, and then the dealer side started smashing in the excess inventory to the auction market, and that prices did what they do when that happens. So we'll see what happens this summer, but it's interesting right now for sure.
So I saw a similar pattern like this coming out of the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, where there was a high demand for new, and people were ordering new. The problem was the factories were were so had shifted back so far that it took them a while to get caught back up. Actually, it took them to about 2011 before they actually got caught back up. It feels similar feel this year, right? And you talk to every manufacturer, and they're still thinking about cutting production even more than what they've done now. So as you watch how these things kind of creep along in the cycle, it makes sense that you're seeing a peak up in auction values because you're starting to see retail values come down. And my theory has always been as that gap between retail value and auction value spread, auction value just keeps going down because more and more people keep going into it. You get more people really testing the waters to see what they can do, and those kind of things. And then also the amount of equipment that's out there as well drives down that price because if I don't get this one, I'll get the next one. If I don't get that one, I'll get the third one down the road. I'm watching the sell bills and I can see, and I can bid on 6 different auctions at the same time from like a desk, so it doesn't, you don't need to do all that traveling around stuff. But as retail values have come down in the marketplace and more dealers have readjusted prices back to where the quote unquote market should be, it tends to bring up auction values because now you're starting to see the parity between okay, so if I have, what's my dealer worth? What's the auction worth? Where am I going to be at? And I'm willing to pay a little more for this one because I can get this one, the one I want, or my dealer doesn't have the one I want. I mean, there's a lot of things that come into play there, but as auction values come or retail values start to come down, you start to see auction values rise. And we're seeing that now. Now, all that being said, there's still a ton of equipment out there. You know what I mean? And that it won't take long. I mean, going through this year and looking at what's going on with the amount of, just like you talked about earlier, how'd you say it? The hopeful worriedness out there.
Hopeful worriedness, yeah.
That's going to drive some demand or some thinking anyway when it comes to order writing periods this year. And we're in that season here right now.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Casey. I think we're actually heading for, I don't know when it'll be, but the biggest turnaround bounce ever, because I've never seen manufacturers be this aggressive. Just like you say, they're just shutting everything down.
Yep.
I mean, and I totally get it. I mean, it's not good business to crank out way too much new product when people don't feel like buying. So you pitch it off. Now they have better tools to do that, and they're doing it. It's hard, local communities and stuff, but even in a belt tightening period like this, again, that focus is shifting. So, for example, on Monday, nice farm auction in New Lothrop, Michigan, by Crow Real Estate and Auction. And they had a 2014 John Deere S670. Now, again, combine market's not been on fire or anything, obviously. This one was nice, 831 SEP hours. So farmers are looking, they know what they want and need, and they're looking for the nicest used one they can get, and preferably with a little age on it. So you got an 11-year-old combine sold for $161,700. Okay, so when we compare our stuff, that's the second highest auction price on a 14 model in 3.5 years. In a market right now that's should be really challenging. Nothing new is selling. Same sale at a 12 model John Deere 9510R, 3,248 hours, 159.5. And that's like the 11th highest with over 3,000 hours. So good, solid price. But right down the line, a 2011 Challenger MT 675D, 2,248 hour sharp rig, sells for 92.4, third highest ever with over 2,000 hours. So farmers being selective when that nice piece is out there. And so that was Monday. The next day, farm auction in Arkansas had a pair of 21 model John Deere 8R310s, 2,369 and 2,337 hours. And they sold for $182 and $180,500. Now, those are the two lowest auction prices I've ever seen on an 8R310. The previous low was 203.5. Now that was pretty far south, so there's, we have to figure that in a little bit. But there's different things happening in this market right now. But back to your point, with the manufacturer level pinching in production, I just think we're setting ourselves up for whenever that spark comes to the grain market, hopefully soon, who knows. But when it happens, I mean, we know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Auction prices will shoot skyward, and there'll be a backlog of, hey, I need a planter. Well, I can only get 7, or I can only get 4.
Yep.
It's be just what we saw in 21 and 2.
Yep. Yep. For sure. So I think the one thing about the flow of equipment in the United States, um, the trends that you see develop start in the eastern, kind of Corn Belt area, kind of work their way to west across the United States, and you start seeing things move north to south as far as equipment goes. Because just like you talked about the machine at Arkansas, the I'd be interested to see how that machine's spec'd comparatively to around it. Because typically machines out of the south are like, they got 4 wheels and a steering wheel and glass. That pretty well covers the specs associated with those machines.
Yeah, specs obviously a huge factor. And that's why, in the website, machineryrepeat.com, in the auction section, it used to be on a tractor, we'd have about two or 3 lines of text description.
Yeah. It's got a
Now
lot
it's
bigger.
like, oh, it feels like I'm writing a freaking novel
Yeah.
description on this piece. But yeah, it makes the difference for sure.
And the flow of machines coming out of the north down into the south, because typically the machines in the north are specs significantly higher. And it feels like as you watch these, the progression of these machines, you'll see a lot of these machines out of the south move north and go into feedlot operations and other, less desirable machine area we don't want to stick, the most expensive tractor in the world in. And you'll see those machines go north, and you'll see these high spec machines go south. There was a John Deere dealer in Georgia that I used to work with a lot. I'd send them five or six tractors, and they'd send me 5 or 6 tractors, and it was just I knew where they were going to go when they got here, and they knew where they were going to go when they got there, and it just worked out well for us. But that flow of equipment north to south is it's a current, right? You see this, and when that current gets disrupted, you start seeing things change. And a couple of disruptors that I've seen so far was when, for example, when the CP series cotton picker came out. Well, you took away all that need for all the support tractors, so you had a bunch of tractors sitting down there for a long time. They kind of worked their way out of them and moved them out and those kind of things. But that was a big disruptor. And another thing we're seeing now just is how the economy gets when it gets slow like this. Less machines move, so then now you have this kind of pool of machines here and a pool of machines there, and this excess stuff that you would typically see kind of walk through this current isn't moving. And now we're starting to see that current kind of pick back up again.
Yeah, 35 years tracking the north to south stuff, Casey, has been real interesting. I always used to say, kind of was a Mason-Dixon line in terms of auction pricing, right or wrong, and believe me, there are no better people than farmers, well, anywhere, but in the South. I love going south, man. It's just wonderful people. But that Mason-Dixon line, auction price-wise, ran across about 1/3 of Missouri and then across. It used to be anything under that, we would have to kind of apples and oranges, like, okay, this sold here. So, but, one of the things the pandemic did, and we'd had online bidding. We've talked about it, Casey, but we've had online bidding for 15 years already at that point. When 2020 hit. But I'm telling you, we jumped the shark tank instantly because, there was such a shortage of equipment. And I started to see, I've noticed over the years, anytime the used market lifts to its upper levels, that the gap between northern and southern auction pricing would shrink.
Yep.
But this time in 2021, 22, there was no difference.
Well, that's your choice, right?
It didn't matter. You just couldn't find it. And there was always, I think, when changes like that happen, when the market goes back, now it's more challenging, you would think it would go back to right what it was, and it just takes a while. So I think what happened is folks in the north here got used when they would see a nice tractor in North Carolina or Kentucky or Georgia or Texas. Now it's not quite thought of the same way as it was maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So it's interesting. I think that was partly why when the pandemic first hit and I saw auction prices immediately go up, there was, again, no reason because corn and beans hadn't gone up, but it's like, boom, prices are going up. So I don't do this very often, but I wrote a blog and I said, we just yanked this whole space forward 5 to 7 years. And I think for dealers, for manufacturers, in the long run, this is going to be such a positive because stuff moves more efficiently.
Yeah.
And for farmers finding what they need. So, and then you got great companies like Valley Transportation that can,
They
get
can
your
live
stuff
anything.
from Georgia up here
Yeah.
to
They do a
Nebraska,
great job.
whatever. So
Yep.
it's just a different world we live in, I guess.
Yep, for sure. And I think that's another thing too about moving equipment. It used to be, I remember moving a piece of equipment one time. I sold like a guy. I was living in Kansas, working at a dealership in Kansas. And I sold something to somebody in Central Florida. I don't remember the little town in Central Florida. And I was like, man, that's going to be really expensive. And it was. It was like 12 grand or something like that to get transfer. I mean, but today that to move that same distance is about the same amount of money, but it's a lot more efficient to do it. Right? Is it take near this long to do it? So it was. It's come a long ways to.
The mentality.
Yeah.
The mentality again, and I know exactly like you said, that used to be like, that is what I need, but man, $12,000, that's it, 8 states away. I don't know. And that just kind of like evaporated.
Yeah.
And so now it's like, 12,000, whatever, just tack it on and hey, it's what I need. Let's go.
12,000 on 400,000 doesn't really hurt as bad as 12,000 on 100,000. You know what I mean?
No, it doesn't. But as humans, we're interesting creatures. Yeah. It's like if it's a groupthink thing, like it used to be like, oh man, I'm in Minnesota, buying something out of Kentucky. But when it becomes normalized, like, hey, where'd you get that? Where'd you get your New Holland T8 410? Oh, I picked it up out of Southern Missouri. I picked it up out of and we all just click the button and everyone's tracking everything. And it just, that's what I need. Click it, get it.
Yep. That's for sure. So probably a good place to stop there, Greg. If folks want to get you to come talk at us at their event or show up at an auction, what's the easiest way to do? Just go to the website and click the link up?
Yeah. Just go to machinerypete.com, folks. On the bottom, there's a link. It says, contact. You can drop a note to our great office and Dan and our great people there. They'll get the note through to me. And it's fun to travel the country, whether it's coming out to auctions or events. So, and I learn a lot as I travel, Casey. So it's great fun.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Greg, it's great talking to you, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Sounds great. Have a good week, Casey.
Right on. Stay tuned for more Moving Iron podcasts after these fine messages.
Looking for more accuracy, more productivity from your current planter? Let's get exact with precision upgrades from John Deere. Start with Exact Emerge and get accurate singulation and spacing at 10 miles per hour. Or choose Exact Shot to promote early root growth and cut fertilizer costs. And with Furrow Vision, save time by verifying seed depth right from your cab. Visit johndeere.com/planner upgrades and see why nothing runs like a Deere.
Hello, and welcome to Moving Iron Podcast Market Sketch. Sean Hackett back here to talk about what's going on in the world of commodities. Sean, how you doing this morning?
I'm good from Tallahassee. My daughter's graduating in her third year this week. So,
wow.
Happy times. And she'll be going to NYU for her master's degree starting in September. So real proud of her. And so operating out of the hotel room today. So
that's nice. I didn't graduate in 3 years. I graduated and it took as long as I could. So congratulations to your daughter. That's a big deal. And wish her best on her trip up to NYU this fall.
Thanks, Casey. Appreciate it.
All right, man. We got some. You've been talking about those cold weather things for a while, and this is the window. You've talked about it's coming. You talked about it being here that last week of April into the first week or two of May, and looks like we had some cold temperatures overnight in the heart of wheat country there in Russia. So I guess talk a little bit about your model, what you're seeing with that right now.
Let's do this setup here. Winter wheat, the wheat complexes begin to hit very, very hard here over the last week on rains that have fallen in a lot of these very, very dry areas of the KC winter wheat belt. And that's kept pressuring the market. We actually made intraday yesterday a new 1-year low for rebounding and closing at that 1-year low. So from a technical price pattern, KC, there's a lot of times what happens is you break a low. There's a lot of sell stop orders under the market. You trigger those sell stop orders. You get a washout event, and then the market reverses. We call it a breakdown failure, reversal higher, technical buy signal. If you can get follow through, on a weekly close on Friday above that level. So that's the setup technically. So last night, a few hours ago, we got a really cold push of air into the core winter wheat belt of Russia and uh, eastern Ukraine. Um, from what we can tell thus far, in most of the core areas of Russia, we got 29 to 30 degrees for a while. In Ukraine, it looked like we got around 31 degrees for a little while. Um, so certainly, cold enough. Um, but with frost, it's always a delicate matter. Was it windy? Was it still? So we'll have to just kind of get some reports later in the day. But sufficiently, it was cold enough that we could have done some major damage. As always, we need to assess the market here later in the day. And there's another chance tonight, Casey, that we may see another cold push into that area before that cold weather air mass kind of moves away. We are looking at on the models over the weekend. Looks like Saturday night into Sunday night for SRW areas, meaning Eastern Winter Wheat Belt. We could be looking at a cold push that some of the models are showing could push us into that sub 30-degree window. And so we just have to be mindful. We're a very critical stage of wheat growth jointing where post dormancy and where, a freeze, if sufficient enough, could certainly take a lot of the bearish trade and turn it less so if we start talking about reduction in quality and reduction in yields. And so we'll have to see. Obviously, frost is always. I know when I predicted a frost in Brazil in coffee areas a few years back, it took a couple of days of assessment to determine what the damage was. Ultimately, that was determined to be very serious, and the market reacted in a little bit of a delayed fashion. So it's not unusual sometimes for the market to take a little bit of time to figure things out. But we did get air that was cold enough that the potential for damage is certainly there, Casey.
Right on. So there, you talked about the bearish side of wheat here for a little bit, and I look at balance sheets, I look at what the USDA says, and I don't understand where the bearishness for wheat's coming from. Can you break that down a little bit?
Well, if you believe the USDA's acreage numbers, we planted more acres. I think we planted an extra million or two than many of the market participants thought. If you look at the crop conditions that came out this past week, crop conditions look pretty good. In the U.S., we're talking about. I think we're 5% above a normal rating, which means the crop overall looks good. And so I think the market is worried about the U.S. balance sheet. I agree with you. The global balance sheet is extremely tight, but the market is hyper focused on the potential U.S. balance sheet being potentially burdensome if this crop finishes here in May and we get trend line yields are higher. The market's thinking we might need to price U.S. wheat as the best buy in town to move some of this U.S. wheat to places where it needs to go, given that there's a shortage in Europe, there's a shortage in Russia, Ukraine. There's tightness elsewhere, and so it's a differential. What we say about wheat is Russia sets the global cash price. Everybody else trades differentially off of the Russia cash price. So the way it works is if the U.S. balance sheet is bearish, we do this for the U.S. price. If the U.S. balance sheet is bullish, we do this to the U.S. price. So what we're trying to do is what's the global price for wheat, which is the Russian cash price? What should that be? And then what differential should the U.S. trade for? Right now, we're trading at a significant, we're discounting U.S. wheat significantly because of the worry that we're going to have a big crop. May not materialize, a long way to go. But when you get rains in areas that were fairly parched, that's the reaction typically. And I think it's overreaction. Funds, I think, are pushing on a string. Obviously, price action will determine, like we talked about, this breakdown, failure, reversal. If we can get this reversal back up, it might indicate that the funds got too bearish on U.S. centric fundamentals alone, and those fundamentals may not be that bearish ultimately when it comes down to it, depending how weather goes the rest of the way, especially if a frost hits some of these areas here in the U.S. here in SRW. So we'll have to just wait and see. But that's the psychology this time of the year. Rain makes grain for winter wheat, and that's why they trade it that way.
All right. So now let's talk a little bit about the flip side of where we're at now. If you take a look at where um, how drought situations that we see are starting to poke up now. Obviously, Central Corn Belt, we're seeing lots of good rain come through there. I was in Chicago over the weekend or last week. I think it rained about every day I was there. But when you're looking at Eastern Corn Belt, Northern Corn Belt, extreme Western United States, the drought situation continues to get worse and worse and worse. There and not a lot of you look at a lot of forecasts. There's some rain in those forecasts, but it's not much to speak of. So I guess if you're looking at drought situation, you sort of talked about Western Corn Belt being a little more dry than normal, but there was also an opportunity where you saw a high pressure trough or something like that, kind of settling in over the top of some of the Corn Belt, the Eastern Corn Belt a little bit. So I guess where are you at on the drought situation, and how do you see that playing out?
Well, I mean, the market typically only reacts to the core grain belt. Doesn't really care about the West. Doesn't care about the North. I'm not saying I'm not saying that's correct.
Oh
By
yeah,
the way.
no, I get
I'm
what you're
just
saying.
saying that if the central core grain belt's getting good weather and it looks good, then everybody just forgets about everything else and doesn't worry about it. Where I come from on this is the USDA says in their planting intentions report that we're supposed to plant close to 95.5 to 96 million acres. The only way you're going to get that is if those fringe acres get planted for corn. And so, given that the weather extremities, whether it's excessive flooding, which we saw in the deep south, southeast, or it's the excess dryness in the periphery, highly unlikely we're going to get those fringe acres to go totally for corn the way that the USDA is envisioning. So, while I don't expect the market to react to that, I think as we get closer to trying to dial in what the acres are going to be at the end of June, the June acreage report, which is pretty darn close to what we actually did, I think we're going to have to dial back those acres by a million or two. And so the bigger impact of what you just mentioned, it probably isn't a reaction today. It's probably a reaction late May, in the middle of June, because that's when the market starts to figure on what's that number going to look like. And that's when the market starts to price in what they think that acreage balance is going to be. And my suspicion is the way the weather is playing out, and it should continue to play out into the latter part of May. I do think we're going to have to peel a million or two acres off the top of corn. And while that's not a quote, quote game changer in itself, it's a significant reduction in the bearish overall trade for corn, and would make it much more sensitive to any dry weather in July, which we are suggesting we're going to see. And then, especially if we get a little bit of heat involved, it would make that kind of weather anomaly during pollination much more critical than if we were to plant that 96 million acre number. So that's the metric here that I think what you just mentioned impacts, but probably not a market mover today.
Okay. All right. Last, let's jump over and talk a lot about what's happening over in the cattle marketplace. Still seeing high prices over there, but the margins are getting tighter, Sean. So I guess talk a little bit about what you see happening there.
The Packers aren't making any money right now. That's usually is a sign that the market is reaching a temporary high. I mean, they're not you can't continue to operate for too long without the demand falling off. It's what it's saying is that you were not getting enough domestic demand to 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 make the Packer margins operate, and that's um, the funds can continue to push the market for a little while, but that ultimately wins out. So my feeling is looking at uh, that metric and looking at the price chart, I just think that the market is getting tired here. And with a lot of the economic worries that the tariff war is instilling and a lot of the negative numbers we're starting to see on the consumer front, it sure seems to me like we're going to get some alleviation of some backing off of beef demand here. And once again, doesn't mean massive bear market crash here we come, but it just means that we're probably reaching an exhaustion point here for this upward movement in the cattle price. And I don't, I'm not a cattle rancher. I don't make my money on the farm as a cattle rancher, but I can tell you that if I did, I'd sure be locking in this price level right now, heading into the August futures price. I just think this is a great place to monetize and bring some money more, bring some cash money back home on the farm. These are very good prices. And yeah, they can always go a little higher, but I mean, at some point, if you look at gift horse in the mouth for too long, you're going to miss the opportunity.
That's for sure. All right, Sean. Probably a good place to stop there. Folks want to reach out to you, get more information about what you're doing at Hackett Financial. What's the best way to do that?
Our website is Hackett, Hackett advisors.com. We also have a Twitter page at Faradex11, where from time to time we talk about some of our statistics, cycles, and correlations and how we go about predicting the future prices of agriculture that your listeners and viewers might find of interest.
All right, Sean, appreciate you being on the podcast. We'll catch you again next time.
Sounds good, Casey. Thanks so much.
All right, stay tuned for more Moving Iron podcasts after these messages.
Well, there they are, mocking you.
See you next year, loser.
That weedy area that's got you thinking, man, I hate that spot. Wish I'd sprayed better. Get the last laugh with a sprayer upgrade from John Deere. Precision upgrades that can increase your sprayer's performance, like ExactApply, advanced nozzles to give you more control at more speeds. It's just one of the many precision upgrades you'll find at johndeere.com. Now, let's see who's laughing.
Hello and welcome back to Moving Iron Podcast. I am pleasured to have a guest from John Deere on the podcast area, and her name is Kayleen Ballesteros. Did I say that correctly?
Did. You
Nailed it. Right on. All right. So far, I'm batting 1,000. All right. Well, Kayleen, it's great to have you on the podcast. We had you on to come talk about what's going on in the world of balers and what that looks like, because we are in that season now where we're looking at what's going on the baler side. So before we get too far into that, though, introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you do for John Deere.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Kayleen Ballesteros, I am a marketing manager for hay and forage products at John Deere, just making sure that we are telling our story to our customers and to our dealers and making sure everybody knows about all the great value that we have in this space.
Excellent. Awesome. So how long have you been working with John Deere?
I have been with John Deere for about 13 years. I actually started in a student position right out of college or right in college and never looked back.
Right on. Well, congratulations. Glad to have you on the podcast here. I'm looking forward to talking about what's going on in baler. So balers used to be just kind of like everything else. They're kind of just a big dumb animal out there working, rolling up grass into a ball and spitting it out the back, right? And
Sure.
they've come a long ways over especially the last couple of years, as you know, technology has come into play, and automation is a new word in the industry, but it's been around for a long time. So it keeps growing, and things are looking out the way they're going. And one of the things that I was doing some research on this as we were coming into it was weave automation, and that was a new one. And it took me a little bit to figure that one out and really follow along. But you know, I guess talk a little bit about weave automation and what that does for the balers.
Yeah, so automation in general isn't new to John Deere. It's not new to the hay industry here at John Deere. I will say, like you said, automation, it's not new, but it feels like it can be a little bit scary. And if you think back to really what that is, honestly, when we replaced a horse pulling a steel plow with a tractor, that was automation. And so really, it's just whatever we're trying to do to make the operator's life a little bit easier and possibly even returning an ROI off of the work that they're doing. And so this all started really for the hay and the baler side years ago when we launched what we call our baler automation, our tractor baler automation. And so what that is the ability to set the size of your bale and set the speed. And your tractor will go that speed. It will stop on its own when that bale has formed, and it will kick it out all on its own. And so that really takes away some of that close monitoring that you need to do to make sure that you have that right size bale. Now, what we have recently launched with weave automation is just an additional piece to that automation functionality. And so if you think back to the days that maybe you were just learning how to bale and you round bale specifically, and it's that art of weaving back and forth over the row really carefully to make sure you have that perfectly square shouldered bale coming out of that baler every time. And that does take some effort. It takes a little bit of practice to do that, and it takes some skills. So just putting anybody in that tractor seat is not always the best case scenario. So what the weave automation does is the hitch of that round baler does the weaving for you. And so based off of that bale size and some of those threshold settings that you set, it will make sure that that bale is a square shouldered bale on its own doing that weaving. And then honestly, you can sit in that cab with a little bit less to worry about and think about some other things. Or if you want to maybe go to your child's basketball game and put somebody else in the seat, that takes a little bit of that stress off of that situation too. In addition, uh, by not running over the crop as you're weaving back and forth and having some more precision there, then you do ultimately offer less potential debris that's introduced into that windrow as well.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing about what's going on with automation now is that it's giving you that ability to do what you just talked about. And I think that's where technology has really opened the door to. I don't need to have the most experienced person inside the cab to operate this stuff anymore. And it's very I don't know if freeing is the right word, but it feels like you talk to a lot of guys that they can now hire the right guy, put them in the cab, and say you just go through a quick tutorial on what buttons to push, and they're kind of in the game.
Exactly. And it's just all to give you choices. There might be times you would like to go do some baling. If you're my dad, that's what he loves. He probably won't give that up. But there are times he might, if it's supper time and he's like, I've been sitting in this cab all day. Hey, Keeleen, or hey, my brother, go jump in. Those are nice options to have some of that flexibility.
Right. So one of the things too I was noticing is we have a lot of pivot irrigation out where I'm at, and there's a lot of circle irrigation with you're talking about alfalfa and other crops they're laying down at the bale. Talk a little bit about how automation works with that.
Yeah, so we do have the windrow widths that it does work, and it does work on a curve. And so primarily, I will say that we this is going to be used on round balers, and so you don't necessarily have round balers and on pivots all too often, but when you do have that functionality as well.
Right on. So out where I'm at, it's a big deal. There's plenty of curves.
Sure. We try to make sure that we have features that work in all situations.
Yep. So one other side too about where technology is going and what has happened is the whole documentation side of things, right? So when I, it's probably been 10 years ago, there was an agronomist we had on staff at the dealership I worked at, and they was working with a customer, and he brought in 25 years worth of yield maps that he had no idea what the yield maps meant, what they would do. All I knew there's some really cool colors in there. And so he gave this stack of papers to the, and memory sticks and all these different things to the agronomist. And he started putting it together and building a profile of what these specific fields look like, and, yield information, fertilizer information, those kind of things. And those things have really changed the way this particular farmer looked at how they operated their operation.
Right.
Well, this is one of the first times where you can start looking at, over the last 5 years, you've kind of seen, I'm going to measure, what this bale weighs and what this moisture rate of this bale weighs, and you kind of have a little picture. But now the technology on the bale documentation side has gotten to be where now you can run that through like Ops Center and those kind of things, where you can get a better look at how the overall field produced and not necessarily how each individual bale produced perform. So just talk a little bit about how bale documentation and Ops Center work together.
Yeah, so we want to make sure that you're able to document really any of the passes. And so this was started more in our row crop area with corn, soybeans, cotton rates. So you can look at seed variety and the yield that you see with it, or I applied XYZ for inputs, and how did that impact my yield? And so this is really just expanding on that concept into the hay jobs that we have. And so with that, we have the ability on our round balers and our large square balers to document data, whether that be bale by bale, so bale count, bale weight, bale location in your field, as well as the bale by bale and field by field moisture as well. And so, what types of things would you be looking at, Casey? Or you'd be looking at, okay, I applied a fertilizer on this field. I didn't apply it over here. Did I get enough bang for my buck to justify putting the fertilizer over here? Or maybe I should expand on that. Um, what does the moisture look like in this field versus over here? Even just simple, when did I cut? And when did I do my first cutting of mowing or mowing
Okay.
and baling? And how do I maybe logistically plan that out for my next cutting? So just anywhere from a simple bale weight, bale moisture, and logistics, all the way up to yield and what was my return on investment with the inputs and practices that I used.
Yeah. And I think that's the knowing those inputs that you put down and the amount of hay that came off those fields, especially like where I'm at, right? We get 3, maybe 4 cuttings a year.
Right.
And if the further north you go, you get even less and less and less. So
Yes.
understanding how you can produce the most crop off of, a very small time frame makes a big difference in how you operate your planting and fertilization and watering and everything else that comes into play. It really pays dividends to understand that.
It does. And if you're somebody that's maybe not quite as interested in the yield portion of it, you can still buy our scale and our sensor, our moisture sensor, so that you at a minimum just know the weights and the moistures that's coming off of your baler. And as you do grow interest in that space, then you can expand up into the baling documentation functionality as well.
One thing about that which I found very interesting when it first came out, and this is mostly on the big square balers when we were looking at those, but
Yeah.
looking at knowing where you drop that bale at, and then all the information associated with those individual bales starts to paint it's just like a yield map in a cornfield, right? Like you can see
Yes.
the different colors, so you can kind of understand where that, am I having a pretty even tonnage across each field? Are my nutrients the same? Are my, is moisture the same? And when each individual parts of these fields, it makes a
Right.
big difference knowing how each bale came out. It makes
Right.
a big difference.
I have an instance even where somebody was looking to justify adding some tile to their
Hmm.
field. They were on a crop rotation. And I'm gonna, hey, no pun intended. I'm gonna go look and see what my moisture looks like on this side of the field versus the other where there's already some existing tile.
Hmm.
And that in itself help them kind of gather that information and make some decisions off of that as well.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about ROI here real quick. I mean, on the weave side of it, I kind of get where that's coming from, but talk a little bit about some of the ROI that you're seeing on weave automation.
Yeah, and so that honestly, yes, you have a return on investment, whether it's quality of hay. So you
Mhm.
can, if you're selling it, you can promote that this is potentially damage free or free of crop runover as
Mhm.
you're selling that, and share that there's that elimination of that with dirt and debris that's introduced. We are currently actually running some trials to validate and show the difference in using weave automation and not, as it relates to introducing some of that debris or not into the windrow. And so that'll be exciting to have. You also just have the ability of the skill set of labor that you use. If you are paying for labor, do you need to have somebody that's an expert, or can you have somebody that's more of an introduction level? And there is a difference in that pay there.
Sure.
Also, just as Casey, a simple like my time is worth money too, and I
Right.
think a lot of folks are really valuing that. So, like I had said earlier, I'd like to get out of the field a little bit earlier and go to a ball game, watch my kiddos tonight. Maybe I can put somebody else in that seat and they can finish out these last few fields for me.
Yep, for sure. And then on the belt documentation side, I mean, the ROI that from there is just like everything else, right? Are you over fertilizing, under fertilizing, overwatering, underwatering?
Yes.
How much more, moisture levels, how much more dry down time do I need to let set the field? Like all those different things show a huge return on assets.
Exactly. And even logistics, right? Which field do I go to
Right.
next?
Mhm.
Potentially, if you have multiple operators, if they're using John Deere Operations Center, they can go in really easily and look at where what field was done and where they should be going next. And so it's really all, at the palm of your hand. You can access that data and also have expectations for logistics as part of that with operators.
Right on. Right on. Well, Kayleen, this has been a great conversation. Thanks for being on the podcast. And if folks want to reach out and get more information about stuff we talked about here, whether it be baler documentation or looking at weave automation, what's the easiest way for people to find that information?
Well, of course, go to johndeere.com. We've got a lot of great product information out there, but like we mentioned earlier, this is hay season. So reach out to your local John Deere dealer. They will have plenty to demo with you and lots to show you. And we've got some great incentives that are out there as well as it relates to any of our hay products.
Right. Well, Kayleen, I appreciate you being on, and we'll catch you again next time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks. Stay tuned for more Moving Iron podcasts after these messages. Mark your calendars for the 2025 Moving Iron Summit, September 24th through the 26th in Austin, Texas. We'll dig into what's happening in the used equipment market and how dealers are adjusting. It's a chance to connect with others in the industry, share what's working, and get a better handle on what's ahead. You want to be part of the 2025 Summit? Visit movingironllc.com for all the info. Welcome back to Moving Iron Podcast. Got Aaron Findle back on to talk about what's happening in the world of equipment. How you doing, bud?
Good, my man.
It has been a windy past couple of days here for sure. It is, but it's also April, so everything is whatever the temperature is. That's the wind speed, and it starts out that way and just gets faster throughout the day, right?
Yesterday literally was 60 by 60.
It was
quite literally.
I think it was
like 63 by 62.
Yeah, it was 63, and I saw some wind gusts in the 60s. So that was a great day.
There you go.
Great day to be in the Panhandle, Nebraska.
It is. At least it ain't humid.
No. There's trade-offs, right? There's a few things happening right now. We got, beets being planted out here right now. So planters full swing. We got planters moving. Most guys are, thinking about planting corn here this week. Watching the weather forecast across the central Corn Belt, eastern Corn Belt, you've seen a lot of rainfall out there. So they're getting some good rain, but overall it feels like the movement of machinery is slow but sure. I've talked about this, how it's kind of sort of coming back and not breakneck speed by any means, but there's more confidence out there in the marketplace as far as what we're seeing. And as you look at combines, which we're in that time frame here where used combines are going to start popping their head back up. The crazy thing about the combine world right now is as close as we are to harvest, there's still deals floating out there of guys that are looking to buy a combine. And that's typically this time of year, you start to see that wane and not pick up, and it feels like it's picking up out there.
I think that goes back to 25 being the year of last minute.
Yep.
Here we are at the end of April, and just 2 days ago, got a call on a planter.
Yeah.
Yep. And their case in point being back to some, one of the factors we talked about, that guy told me it took forever to get renewed.
Yeah.
So that pushes him out. He can't have it he don't want it on the balance sheet, regardless of what the program is, regardless of what the price is. It's just a matter of, okay, we got this done. Then we get, his February got slid to April. But, it was kind of a way to think about it. And I think the combines, obviously, typically the biggest ticket of the big ticket items on the farm. It wouldn't make any sense for it to not be the most last minute.
Right.
Hey, can you grease that while they're loading it on the truck? Because as soon as it gets here, it's time to go.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a lot of that this year. I know it has been with planters. It has been all year that way. Well, not all year. It wouldn't be last minute, but here in, say, the month of April. Oddly enough, not to pull away from that issue, something that is and I'm bringing it up because we talked about it a couple weeks ago. In the green world, what we call a 6, a red Maxim, a 5 or 6, whatever they are. The 100 to 175
The most
is waking up from its slumber.
Isn't it though? It's
And,
it's
and
like
it's,
nothing
and
to
it's
something,
showing
right?
up to the party.
Yeah.
It's almost like everybody heard how cheap they were. So, well, I suppose we should probably look into one.
Yeah.
The other thing I wonder is we're getting almost to month 5 out of 12. Are them calf checks steaming a little bit? Probably better do something with that.
Yeah.
Because I know in the wholesale world, a lot of activity the last 10 days to cow calf country.
Yeah.
That's where there's nobody.
the most
I haven't had anybody in Central Illinois begging for one to run an auger.
Right.
But in the cow calf parts of the world, it's wake up time, and here we go.
Yeah. It's been a
the most
Boy, is it a buyer's market?
yeah, exactly. That was a bit of a conundrum there to start with. When you've watched how strong the cattle market's been over the last 24 months, really. I mean, just every time the cattle market was supposed to implode, it just got stronger. And as you watch things bounce along, that was the one spectrum that I couldn't get my head wrapped around of why that was so.
the most
Not that people need to come buy stuff because it was expensive cows, but I mean, typically
the most
if they're going to update stuff. I mean, on the ranch, it's not like you have a lot of equipment to go update.
Yeah.
You got balers and loader tractors and bale movers and that kind of stuff. And you don't
tractors,
you know.
baler, a swather. There, you got like 4
Yeah.
big ticket items, which on the row crop farm is like his big auger.
Right. And you start watching those things move along. That to me is I just couldn't get my head in the right spot. Like I couldn't understand it. But it's like everything else, right? I mean, I've been talking about how I can't, this whole basically since post COVID, I've been talking about the fundamentals aren't adding up to what they should be doing, right?
Right.
And everyone's just scared to death of what the next shoe to drop is, right? Right. You start watching the news and I was listening to a podcast this morning. Let's do every morning, a little news blurb, giving me, 20 minutes of what's going on around the world. And they were talking about
the most
Chinese economy getting squeezed because of tariffs, right? I'm like, oh, that's okay. Well, they're about sharing the thing. Well, 95% of everything goes from, I think I was the statistic and I hadn't had time to look it up to fact check it. So all the fact checkers out there, I'm just saying this because this is what I heard. But it was something like this particular person they were talking to, which probably wasn't extreme, but 95% of what they sell, he's a Chinese business guy, 95% of what they sell goes to the United States. And that was the International Monetary Fund said something like 60% of the world's container freight fleet has been shrunk down to 60% because it's all coming to the United States, right? Well, sooner or later, the United States is going to have to restock their shelves, right? They're going to have to come in and start getting stuff again, and that's when the tariff thing is going to change. But the point of me saying all that is, from one day to the next, you have no idea what tariffs going to be levied or what tweet's going to be out there that's just going to now change the direction of a certain commodity class. And the next thing you know, oh, well, we were just kidding. And by the end of the day, it's back to where it was. I mean, so I get it. I get why people are like, I'm just going to sit on this stack of cash over here for a minute until I absolutely have to do something with it.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to go do something with it.
And that's a good point. I forgot about the political environment. That's another huge impact on the last minute April. That we're living in. What's tomorrow?
Right. Yep.
Like I've said a couple times, November, what was it, 6th or whatever? My phone rang off the hook.
Right.
And now it's okay. Now let's, hit the brakes and see where we're at. And okay, go. It's like every week is that way where you have, talked to 10 guys last week about these 10 things and they call all at once.
Yep.
Just what factor is going to tip over center to make this happen? There's just so much of that out there.
Yeah.
Another thing, to that 100 to 175 rig, if there was ever in history a category that did not care what the actual marketplace was doing, it was that.
Oh, yeah.
In a loader tractor.
Yep.
What
The
was
most-
second?
The most,
Row
the
crop
most,
tractors.
Mm-hmm.
What was the first thing to be the grossest glut ever? In the last glut that we're in, row crop tractors.
Right.
Followed closely by 100 to 175s.
Yep.
You know, we basically, the industry decided, well, these have never been problems. Let's make them one.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Let's see if we can do it. See how far we can push this envelope. Because I mean, you're right. I mean, that's if you look at the number of machines that are out in the marketplace right now, it is a. I haven't checked for about 30 days. So you go back and check. But last time I checked, it was north of almost 16,000. And we're, if I remember right, if you go back and look at August of 2014, as far back as records I have, I can track that, we were 1,500 machines off of that point, and that was
the
I
most.
mean less. You know, so we're
Right.
almost back to where some of the highest inventory levels we'd ever seen in farm equipment history. Now we're at the same level, but machines are 170% more. You know, so.
I was just going to say, your highest priced tractor in 14 is middle of the pack at best. Now.
Right. Yeah. If you have I was having a conversation with this. I was teaching, I taught a music equipment class to some guys the other day. We were talking about the cost of equipment and those kind of things. And I was like, you know, back 2014 timeframe, you could get a brand new row crop, 350 horsepower row crop tractor, 25 horsepower row crop tractor for 250 probably, right? 275, something like that.
Well, even, yeah. I mean, even blow it up to 3.
Yeah. And I'm like, today you go, that's a tractor that's got, you're looking at someone right now saying, hey, that's got 3,000 hours on it. Here you go. I mean, that's where we're at. I go, because the price of new is 650,
Right.
So you start going down that path, you start doing the math backwards, that's the beautiful thing I think about the used equipment space is that you have this defined break in action somewhere, right? So you've got the first, 5 years from new is probably a bit of a stretch, but those are influenced by what the price of new is, right?
Right.
Once you get past that, and I would say once you get past 3 years, it really starts to teeter.
For sure.
But that 4 to 5 years, kind of the transitionary period, right? Where depending on hours and conditions, so like that, it does affect it, right? But once you get past that, and you start getting into that 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old stuff, hours are what drives that marketplace, right? I used to have a conversation with a guy all the time about, it doesn't necessarily, when you get to that point, I'm more concerned about taking my 7,000 hours down to 5,000 hours or 4,000 hours or whatever the number is. I'm not necessarily concerned about the year unless there's a big, break in the year, like it's a year model break or something like that, where there's a specific thing that I'm going to upgrade to or something like that. But at that point, it's really, I'm trading hours for hours. And that's what I'm trying to, reduce my wear on the machine that I'm buying down to a certain point. And that's what you're at. And I think that in that circumstance to me is I think a little bit that's what drives the loader tractor market more than anything. Is there's these got these mowing tractors that come off these state contracts and those kind of things, and you start looking at how those come in. Most of those come in with less than 500 hours on them,
right?
And as you watch how that moves, a lot of the machines that get traded in on those 500-hour machines are 1,700-hour machines, 2,000-hour machines, 1,000-hour machines, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, 15 to 25, say.
And then you start looking at the machines that get traded between that 1,000, 2,000-hour range. Those machines that are coming in on those are all like 3,000, 5,000-hour machines for the most part. That's when you see that. And then when you get to the 5,000-hour machine, that's when you start getting those 7,000, 10,000-hour machines that start coming in. We're talking like 20-year-old tractors at that point.
End user machines.
That's right. That's right. For sale by owners. That's usually when a lot of those come into play. And I think that's the difference, I think, on that loader tractor market compared to like a row crop tractor marketplace where we just talked about a 3 buying cycles through there to get to 10,000 hours. And on a row crop tractor side, 10,000 hours, you might see that tractor change hands 5 or 6 times before it gets to 10,000 hours.
Very true.
And I think that's the difference in that marketplace where you start looking at the end user and how that drives the market. The the breadth and width of these customers as they come in is so much more. It's such a wider gap than it is when you start looking at some of the row crop tractor guys, where it's a lot more narrow because the number of hours they put on them, right? I mean, it's if some guys are loader tractors, also their baling tractor, right? So they have a significant significant more hours that are putting on them, but the hours they're putting them on, it feels like to me it's different level. It's a different level of wear and tear, if you will, for lack of a better term, than what you see on some of these, big row crop tractors that are pulling a 35, 40-foot disc, and they're burying it to the ground, and they're running big planters and those kind of things, and the hydraulic capacities and those kind of things that come into play.
Well,
that's the other thing of it.
My 150 horse out running a baler all day that says it only takes 80. I'm running around 1800 RPM all day.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Right.
Click, 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 click. That's the only thing hitting me. Joe Blow across the road with his 300 horse strip tilling that takes 275, 280 to pull.
Right.
It's all bunny all day.
Right.
Yep. So yeah, to your point, huge difference in what those hours do. There's nothing on the ranch within the normal job descriptions of a tractor that are going to do anything to that tractor.
Right. Yep.
A lot of us are pretty open-minded thinkers about loading things or making things, and that's when things happen, not in regular use.
Yeah, exactly. And
there again, Casey, I can remember every farm, say back in the 80s, things stair-stepped.
Right.
You got a new planting tractor. Planting tractor became tillage tractor. Tillage tractor became loader tractor.
Right.
Say when everything's a 4440 or what have you.
Right. Yep.
You just stair step it down. Nobody bought a new loader tractor. You might buy a new loader.
Right.
But the tractor was once upon a time the planting tractor. That's everybody's loader tractor at one time was the planting tractor. Yep. They just slid it down the scale.
Yep. Yep. And I think the other side too, on the dollars and cents side of what we see on that side, is you'll see a lot more swathers and a lot more balers get updated before you see a loader tractor get updated.
Right.
And obviously, right. I mean, it's like a combine, right? The baler is the combine of the ranch, and the swather is it's the combine head of the ranch.
Right.
That's the way to put it.
Right.
So I mean,
both pieces of the combine.
That's right. And you look at those things, you'll see. I think a lot of guys will look at a baler long before they look at the loader tractor, and start working their way through that, because balers, just like everything else, they got a lot of wear items on them. So when you get to a certain bale count number, right, your cost of reconditioning
on a ranch, that is the biggest, that is the number one money eater, is the baler.
Yep, for sure.
It's just like that. As far as the shop goes, that's the combine on the ranch.
Right.
It's a big bill every year. But do you want to be fighting net wrap at midnight? Do you want to be just about have a bale done and pull a belt apart?
Yeah.
I don't want to stop and come back here.
Right. And not on the swather. I mean, the swather head is where everything's at, right? So, I mean, you've got your turtle heads, you got your blades, and these kind of things, your knives, whatnot. So those things all
the shape of the head, and it's usually never the engine, because there again, they got more power than the ranch is going to use.
Right.
The feedlot out there cutting 10-foot sedan grass with that swather all day, little different. But on the ranch, like me, myself, I have a 19-year-old swather. The only thing I'm never worried about the engine, the frame, none of that. It's wheel motors.
Right.
A wheel motor's $5,000.
Right.
On the ranch, that's a combine engine.
Right.
I mean, it's economics of scale, and it's so different.
Yep.
One to the other.
Yeah. And I think it changes the spectrum of how people look at that. So as you kind of break this thing down, but this is the first time in my 20 years of doing this that I've ever seen loader tractors where people are like, I can't get rid of these. What are we doing? And you're like, what do I do with my hands? Like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like where no one, it's a weird scenario where you've seen that happen. And even on the baler side, like I didn't hear anybody say like, what are you gonna do with all these balers? Right. Didn't hear anybody say anything about that.
That's, just a quick note. I think because those of us in baler country, that's every year.
Well,
every April, May, oh man, we got 66, 67, 68, 69 MR.
Yeah.
But they disappear.
Yep.
And if they don't, you auction them and you don't bleed to death.
Right.
Well,
even if they don't disappear in the spring, what you have left over by the end of the season goes away too. Right.
Or you get some showers into June, beginning of July. All of a sudden, everybody's got a second baler.
Yeah. Because that's the other thing too. And like in the area where we're at, where you have so much irrigated alfalfa and triticale and
just plain feed,
everything, grass, and run out of stuff, all the feed that comes out of here. It's important to get that stuff packed up for sure. Yep. All right, buddy. Probably a good place to stop. If folks want to reach out to you, get more information on what you got, how do they do that?
Well, I tell you what, call me or text me, 308-760-1193. Email me, afintel, 1L, at 21equip.com. Or, check me on social media.
Right on. Casey Seymour, you can find me on all the social media stuff at Moving Iron LLC or at Moving Iron Podcast. Check me out there. You can also go to AgWeb, where you can see this audio version of this. You can also go to Farm Journal's YouTube channel. You can see the video version of there as well. So I want to thank Greg Machinery Pete Peterson for being on this edition of Moving Iron Podcast. I want to thank Sean Hackett for coming on and talking about commodities, and Aaron Finnell for coming on and talking about what's happening in the business. And with that, I want special thanks to John Deere for sponsoring this edition of the Moving Iron Podcast. So with that, I'm Casey Seymour with Aaron Finnell. It's going to be smart, folks. Out.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again next week. And remember, Moving Iron is available on Farm Journal's YouTube channel and anywhere podcasts are found. So until next time, let's move some iron.